Well, today's video is going to be about the fox and the hound. So I have a Samoyed. He's not a hound, but he does like to bark at foxes whenever they pop up in our backyard or in our neighborhood. Although I'm pretty sure he wouldn't be friends with the fox. I don't think Rainy's going to stay around too long for the video, but he's like, but I want to stand right here, Mommy. Okay. You want to stand there? You want to sit there? You're a good baby. He would not make a good hunting dog. He would not. You wouldn't. I'm sorry, but you wouldn't. There's a fox. Get the fox. He's like, that's a stuffed one, Mommy. It is not Foxers. I guess he wants to stay. Give me a moment and I'll be right back. So we're back. Sorry about that. Had to finish making sure I had everything ready. So, as I said, we are going to be talking about The Fox and the Hound, which came out in 1981. It does have a sequel. I will go over that. First, we'll go over the original. So the whole premise of the movie is there's a mother fox who's running from hunters, and she has her little kit with her. And she ends up having to leave it at the edge of this farm. And then she runs off, and we hear a gunshot, and we assume, okay, she's gone the way of Bambi's mother, unfortunately. Although the little fox kid is unfortunately not as old as Bambi. He still seems very young. Very much in the... probably only a couple of weeks old, if that. I don't know. I don't remember how quickly foxes mature, but that's the way that goes. And then we enter an owl, who's referred to as Big Mama. And her, well, she, looks over this baby fox and she's like, okay, I need the... The dog is being cute. I'll show you the dog be cute. Aren't you so cute? Aren't you so cute? Yeah, you're cute. My baby. Okay, back to the video. Sorry about that. So, we have the owl, and the owl decides, okay, well, we need to find someone that can take care of this baby fox because I can't, even though Tod, well, we know it's going to be Tod, but Tod just kind of like nuzzles up to her, and she's like, no. One moment, the dog wants out. Well, the dog's out of the room now. We'll see how long that lasts. Probably the rest of the video. He's probably going to go put his head out whatever other window in the house is open. So we do that. So baby fox, owl, birds. The owl goes and finds these two other birds whose name are Dinky, who is just a little sparrow, and Boomer, who is a woodpecker. They're going after this caterpillar. It's just a recurring theme throughout the movie of these two birds going after this caterpillar, and they never catch the caterpillar. They get close, but they never actually catch it. Note for the shirt, I don't have any shirts with foxes or hounds on them, so I went with a red panda. They're cute. Shirt says, to-do list, nothing, lazy panda. It's like closest thing I had to something that looked vaguely like a fox that wasn't already one of the dog shirts that I've worn. So that's what we get there. So we have, the Big Mama and Boomer and Dinky go to the farmhouse of the farm where the fox was left, and they, knock on the door. The woodpecker knocks on the door, opens it. Is this Widow Tweed is what her name is. We never really learn that much about her past, except she's obviously a widow who lives on a farm and, has She has a cow and a chicken and some other things, but she's not too, she doesn't have too many other people around her, and she seems rather lonely. But they trick her into finding the baby fox, and she takes the baby fox in, she feeds it, and she names it Tod because he's very much like a toddler, so she calls him Tod. Then we cut to, just like in the, her neighbor. We cut to her neighbor, Amos Slade, who is a hunter, and he has a dog named Chief. I don't know exactly what kind of dog Chief is off the top of my head. But Amos brings home a puppy, little hound dog puppy, who he names Copper. And we get this adorable bit because Chief is just like, okay, why are you bringing this thing into my house, to my territory? And Chief is very much a trained hunting dog. He's getting a little old, so it makes sense for Amos to want to bring in another dog to be able to, hunt with, train to hunt. So that way after, dogs get old, unfortunately. I know that route. But what ends up happening is we get this adorable bit where, Chief lays down, and then Copper just kind of comes and he like lays on, like the crook of Chief's leg, and Chief is just like, fine, you can stay here. And he like, snuggles her to the puppy, and I just find that adorable. We see bits throughout the movie that Chief does care about Tod. And Chief does care about Copper. Cares about Copper. Chief does not care for Tod unless he's a pelt on the wall. Yeah, that's a morbid thought, but yeah, that's the way hunters are. So we end up having that, and then we cut to, probably it's just maybe a couple of days later or whatever. Tod gets in trouble in the barn because he tried to sniff chickens, and that unfortunately causes a bunch of chaos in the barn, and that results in him, kind of getting, scolded by Widow Tweed, and he goes off, and Dinky and Boomer are still going after the caterpillar, so they can't play with him, and then we get, he goes off to explore in the woods, and then we cut over to Copper and Chief, and Copper smells something, so he goes off to try to figure out what it is, and Chief is like, well, you probably shouldn't do that, the master will get angry. And, Copper's not really worried about this. He's still the whole naive pup, and he goes off into the little woods area, but, around the Widow Tweed and Amos's farms. And we see, Tod's bopping around playing, and then we see Copper show up, and he's sniffing around and everything, and then he finds Copper, and Copper finds Tod, and he's like, Todd's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm sniffing for something I never smelled before. That's you. Aroo. Because when hound dogs find what they're supposed to find, they howl. And, Tod and Copper start playing. They played hide and seek, and we get the best of friends song sung by Big Mama, which is just sweet. And we get the two of them playing, and then we get Copper has to go back, and Tod goes back to his place, and then Copper sneaks off again on another day, and they go swimming and have more fun, and we get the they vow to be best friends, best of friends, they vow to be, friends forever, which probably that little interaction is probably just going to be the, going to be the quote at the end of the video. If you haven't figured that out by now, that's what it is. What can I say? It's a good quote that I think a lot of people should pay more attention to and should follow more, because the tagline for the movie was, I think it was like a best friends who didn't realize they were supposed to be enemies, because, Copper at this point doesn't realize that he has to hunt, and that hunting involves leading your master to something to kill it so your master can skin it. And Tod unfortunately hasn't realized that that's what Amos does. That's what Copper is going to be trained to do. But then we get, Copper gets a little bit in trouble because he keeps running off to play with Tod, so he gets tied up. And that's when, Tod ends up having his interaction with Chief. And Chief, Tod goes into where Chief is sleeping in his barrel, and Copper tries to warn him not to. And that doesn't go well. Chief wakes up and he starts chasing starts chasing Tod all around the farm, all around Slade's farm. And, messes with the chickens and gets a bunch of stuff knocked over, gets a whole bunch of stuff ruined. Amos comes out and starts shooting at him. Admittedly, it's, I don't know if Amos knows that Widow Tweed has a fox for a pet or not. It's not like she went over and informed him, hey, Mr. Amos, or hey, Amos, I got a fox for a pet. I don't want you and your hounds hunting it. That might have been a good idea to do, but that doesn't seem, Amos doesn't seem to be the most neighborly of person. Plus, he seems the biggest fan of Widow Tweed. He's like, silly women. He's like silly, stubborn women or whatever it is. Chief and Amos end up chasing Tod, and Tod ends up getting onto Widow Tweed's, car as she's driving, and that results in the car getting shot. And then she gets out and she's angry, very, very, very angry at Slade. And then, she takes his gun and she fires at his own car. It's a buckshot round, so it just kind of, destroys his radiator. And then that was, him shouting, if I ever see that fox again, it's going to be, a pelt on my wall, or whatever the case is. And, that doesn't go well. And, so then Tod has to stay inside, and then Amos is like, okay, I'm going hunting. And he packs up his car after he probably fixed it. And then, gets Chief, gets Copper, and, they're all getting ready to go. And Tod sneaks over there as fast as he can to try to say goodbye. And that leads to, Amos and Copper and Chief are riding off in the car. And then we get where Tod ends up interacting with Big Mama, Dinky, and Boomer, and they explain that Amos is a hunter, and Copper is going to be trained to be a hunting dog. And Todd's like, oh, well, Copper wouldn't do that. He wouldn't hunt me. We're friends. And we get, where Tod kind of has to have the realization of, oh, yeah, because they show him Amos's, shed where he has all of his pelts. Which, admittedly, the time frame that this movie seems to take place in, it's made in, 1981 is when it was released, but given the fact that it seems to take place in, the more rural area and stuff like that, there's probably, I don't know if it took place, I don't remember if they ever state, what year it takes place in. The sequel may have, set in something to, maybe, the mid-60s, 50s, 60s range. I don't know exactly. But I don't remember if they ever specifically state what year, Fox and the Hound is supposed to take place in. But, Amos is a hunter. It's what he does. I'm not the biggest advocate for hunting, but I mean, I understand that at certain points in time, that's what you have to do. But, this is not about my opinion on hunting. This is just about what they show in the movie. So moving on. But we get Tod realizing that, oh, yeah. Okay, I really hope that Copper, he's probably going to come back a hunting dog, but I really hope that he remembers that we're supposed to be friends type thing. And then, winter comes along and Dinky and Boomer fly south for the winter. And we don't really see too much of Tod in that time frame. We don't see too much of Tod in that time. We see Amos, Chief, and Copper. And, Copper is still very much a puppy when they leave. It seems to be around fall-ish or so when they leave. And, so we slowly get a watch as Copper, is being trained in sniffing around and finding scents and following the scents for, quails, rabbits, foxes, raccoons, what have you. And, he gets better and better to the point where he's, kind of a better hunting dog than Chief at this point in time, which Chief doesn't like because, it's like the whole, oh, this young guy's moving on my territory type thing. And then, they're heading back. And then we cut back to Widow Tweed's farm where we see, Big Mama is there and she's, cleaning out her nest. And then we see Tod, who's now full grown, and Dinky and Boomer show back up. And they're like, playing with Tod and everything. Like Boomer takes Tod's tail, like puts it around his neck like it's a scarf, which is just funny. And which is just funny in my opinion. But they're playing with like Tod's tail like it's a scarf, which is a bad joke, but they're his friends, so it's it's like it's a joke that your friends can make with you. And then they see Amos, Copper, and Chief showing back up, and Tod sees how much bigger Tod sees how much bigger Copper has gotten, and Big Mama points out, yeah, and all those furs that he helped track down too. And Tod's just like, oh, it doesn't matter, Big Mama. Copper's still gonna be my friend. Tod goes over later that night, and him and Copper talk, and Copper's like, well, I am glad to see you, Tod, but you can't be here. I'm a hunting dog now. I can't let you be here. And if Chief wakes up, he's gonna come after you, and that'll bring out Master. And Copper doesn't want to see Tod get hurt, but he's also been a lot more trained in how to follow his instincts when it comes to certain things, when it comes to tracking foxes and other animals. And Copper, at least, he's glad that he got to see Tod again, but he wants Tod to leave so he doesn't have to, try to hunt him. And that doesn't go so well because Chief wakes up and then he starts chasing Tod, and that brings out Amos, and then him and Copper and Chief are all hunting after Tod, who's running around, running all over the place, scurrying around. Copper finds Tod at one point, and he's like, for the sake of our friendship, I will lead him down a different track, and you try to get away, and that doesn't work. And then unfortunately Tod and Chief end up on this, railway bridge that looks rather rickety in my opinion, and a train starts coming. And Tod is able to duck, but unfortunately Chief isn't, and Chief gets knocked off, and he falls down the cliff ravine type thing and lands in the water where he's hurt. And that's not a good thing to happen to anyone, even if you don't necessarily like the character itself necessarily. But Chief's just doing what he was trained to do, so he gets hurt. Tod's fine, but Copper and Amos are of course extremely angry about this. And Copper, pretty much for Copper in his mind, that's kind of when his friendship with Tod ended, because it's like, okay, you got Chief hurt, you got the guy that's basically my mentor, you got him hurt, and I'm gonna get my, if I'll get you if it's the last thing I do type of thing. And what ends up happening is, Amos goes to Widow Tweed, and he's like, okay, if I ever catch that fox on my property again, or if I ever see that fox again, I'm catching it, and I'm going to kill it. And, that's not good. So Widow Tweed decides that, okay, Tod can't stay here anymore because it's not safe for him. And, she kind of, she puts on like her Sunday best and her, everything, and gets dressed up, and she takes Tod to a game preserve. You know, we get the whole bit of them driving and like her remembering everything. And I would like to think that a lot of people who end up watching these videos probably have had pets of their own. Maybe not necessarily dogs. Maybe it's a cat. Maybe you have had a fox. Maybe it's a bird of some kind. Maybe it's a reptile or a snake of some kind, or, you know, a rabbit or whatever type of pet that you've had. That if you had a pet when you were young and as you grew up, you know that the pet gets older. And there's going to always end up being that one last drive that you take that pet on. The last time you take it to the vet, or the last time you take it somewhere because it's getting old. In this case, it's a different context. She's doing it for Tod's own good, because if she takes Tod to the game preserve, then Amos can't go after him. Tod's in a safer spot. There's other animals there. But, you know, it's also Tod is not a fox that has been out in the wild, so he doesn't quite know how to survive in the wild, which we'll get into in a moment. But, you know, a lot of people have had that instance where it comes to a pet where this is the last time that you're going to get to do that drive with that animal. And it takes Tod a few minutes, I think, to realize what's going on, because it's just like, he's just like, oh, we're going to go for a drive. And then he sees how sad, you know, Widow Tweed is, and he realizes, oh, that's something bad's happening. And, you know, we get them getting to where she can release him for the game preserve. She's giving him, you know, one last hug, and she takes his collar off, and she leaves, and it's basically, no, you have to stay here now. And she goes back home. And, you know, Tod then spends that night, you know, he ends up interacting with a very mean badger, and then he interacts with a nice hedgehog, or a porcupine. It's a porcupine, I think. That helps him. And unfortunately, Tod does not have a very good night in the forest the first night, in the woods, forest, whatever, the first night, because you know, it's raining and pouring and everything, and he gets soaked, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on, and, you know, mean people, or mean badger, nice porcupine, but the porcupine unfortunately ends up poking him in the morning when he falls, and then he falls out of the tree, which is funny. But, you know, when Widow Tweed arrives back at her house, we see Amos watching, and he's like, she dropped that fox off at the game preserve, didn't she? Well, looks like that's where we're going, Copper. And we get a scene with Chief where he has a broken leg. It's all bandaged up and everything, and he's getting to sleep in the house for the time being, because being outside probably wouldn't be good on healing his leg. And Amos does seem to care about his dogs. Amos is not the nicest man in the world by any means, but he does seem to at least care about Chief and Copper, which is good in my opinion. He's at least, you know, he doesn't beat them. He kind of yells at Chief every now and then, but he's not going to beat Chief, I don't think. Does threaten him, but, you know, Chief's kind of playing up the whole act. He's like, Chief is like, nice warm place to sleep, warm ovens, soft pillows. They're like bags of grain or whatever that he's sleeping on, but I can see why those would be softer than, you know, the ground in a barrel. He's got a bandaged up leg. Not Rainy, but the previous dog that I've had, who, you know, we lost. We had him pretty much from I was 5 up until I was like at 18, 19 range when I was in college. And, you know, he'd had leg problems at various points in times. He was just a mutt breed. If you've ever seen Benji, he kind of looks like Benji. And if you don't know what Benji is, look Benji up. And Bear was our dog's name, and he was just, well, this is just what Bear looked like. But cute, fluffy. But he'd had leg problems at times. So I've had to deal with a dog that has like casts on their legs before. Rainy hasn't hit that part yet. Hopefully he won't for a while, but he's only like, I think 6, 7 range, I think, from what we've deduced from how old he is. from how old we think he is, I should say. But we get a lot. Chief tries to plays up a little bit how hurt he is, to try to get sympathy from Copper and Amos, and that doesn't work, because Amos and Copper are a little more focused on trying to get, how are we gonna catch this fox? So they come up with the whole, they're gonna use bear traps, and they, a couple of days later, I think, or whatever, is when they head to the forest, to the game preserve. But the next morning, we see Tod coming. We see Tod waking up. He unfortunately gets pricked by the porcupine, and kind of unfortunately has the whole realization of what happened last night type of moment. And then we see Big Mama show up, and she talks to this female fox whose name is Vixie, because a female fox is usually referred to as a vixen, so her name is Vixie. There's also a DC comic book hero named Vixen. This is what she looks like. She has the power to be able to manifest powers of animals, not like Beast Boy, where she can like transform into an animal, but where she has, I think it's like animal spirits. I think it's been a while since I've watched anything that has her in it, unfortunately, but like she has the ability to, like, if she uses this certain technique or spirit or whatever, it allows her to, have like the talons of an eagle or the wings of an eagle, or like, panther abilities, or whatever the case may be. She's fun. I've seen her in a few things, but not too much, unfortunately, for DC, but we have that. But moving on, so we have Vixie, and Big Mom is like, hey Vixie, there's a new fox here in the forest, or his name's Tod. He's very handsome, about your age. She's like, oh, well, where is he? Maybe I can show him around. So Big Mama finds Tod, and basically does the whole, makes Tod look at Vixie, and he kind of falls in love right away type of thing. And then we get him trying to impress Vixie by pretending that he knows how to hunt. Well, pretending that he knows how to fish, which does not go well. Does not go well at all for Tod. He ends up soaked and making a fool of himself. Yeah. And then he gets kind of angry at Vixie, and she's just like, well, why are you getting angry at me? I'm not the one that told you to try to hop on that log and try to catch fish. You don't have to try to, impress me type of a thing. And so she's just very, they snap at each other. And then, admittedly, I do have to agree, Vixie is in the right here. She didn't try to get him to try to impress her. She wasn't trying to make him make a fool of himself or anything like that. So I would say that I agree with Vixie on that, Vixie is in the right in this case, but I'm sure some people would say that Tod is in the right too. Tod's kind of not having a very good day. The previous day, he got left in this random forest that he has no idea where he is by the woman who's raised him. And then, there was a mean badger. There was a porcupine that was nice, but then I got poked, and then I fell off a tree. And then now I met this lady fox who's very pretty, but then I, kind of made a fool of myself, and now she's laughing at me, and I'm just not happy. Which is just kind of funny in and of itself if you think about it. Vixie, is like, okay, well, fine, I'm gonna go over here then. And then we have Big Mama kind of saying about, you have to, let a natural attraction work. And we get, the two of, Tod is like, he's like, okay, well, Vixie, it's basically the whole thing of, the whole, we gotta get this love song in here type thing. About natural attraction. There's something naturally, natural that attracts the two of you to each other, see what comes of it type thing. Which is cute. It's not my favorite Disney love song, but it's still cute. And we get them, we get Tod kind of trying to apologize to Vixie. He gives her a flower, and then, they're happy. And then, they get along much better after that. And then we cut to, like, the night or so, or come to a night scene. Night, I don't remember. It's supposed to be like just like the night after Tod gets dropped off there, like a day or two later or something like that. Not sure. But Amos and Copper sneak into the game preserve, and he tries to, yeah, they sneak into the game preserve. They find kind of a track area where Tod tends to go through. They set up a bunch of these bear snap traps and cover them with leaves so that way Tod won't see them. And then we get to the next morning, and we have Vixie and Tod, being very happy together. And then, they almost end up setting off the, Tod almost ends up setting off the, he does end up setting off the bear traps, but they don't get him. And then Amos and Copper start chasing Tod and Vixie, and then they get chased back to the burrow, and they try to escape, but then, Amos sets a fire at one end, and Copper and him are on the other end. And Vixie and Tod jump out of the fire end very quickly. And then, Amos and Copper keep chasing them, and Tod and Copper end up kind of facing off. At one point, this, and then we get where the bear comes in. And then, Copper fights the bear. Amos tries to shoot the bear. Amos gets hurt. He gets his gun knocked away from him. Then we get Tod. Tod is like very much, he could just leave Copper and Amos to die by the bear's hands. But Tod's not going to do that, of course. He runs down. He starts, attacking the bear, getting the bear distracted. Him and Copper kind of work together to get the bear to fall off this ravine, I guess is the best way of putting it. There's a waterfall, and the bear falls down through the ravine into the water. I don't remember if it's ever stated that the bear dies, or if it's just the bear, decides, okay, this ain't worth it, and then walks off. I don't remember exactly what happens to the bear. But what ends up happening is Tod ends up kind of getting hurt. But he's hurt, but he's fine. And then Copper's there. And then we have Amos show up, and he's got his gun pointed directly at Tod. And Copper gets in the way. And, that's not really a good thing. Copper gets between Tod and Amos and the gun. And kind of like the whole, you shoot him, you shoot me. He is my friend type of thing. And Amos doesn't shoot, of course. If you've seen the movie, you know this. Amos doesn't shoot. They leave. Apparently Amos doesn't get in trouble for the fact that he, made his way onto, probably is like federal or state land that he's not supposed to be on to hunt. Because reasons. And, Tod ends up being okay. Copper ends up being okay. They kind of have this one last look between each other before Copper and Amos leave. And then we cut to probably just a couple of bit later. I don't remember if it states specifically. It's just, I don't remember exactly what it is, but we get, we cut to, I think it's Amos's farm. Yeah, it's Amos's farm. Like, Widow Tweed's there, patching up his foot, helping him, and it's like springtime again or whatever, and Tod or Copper and Chief are happy. And I think it's either Copper smells something in the air that is Tod, and he kind of looks off in the right direction for where Tod would be, or it was Tod and Vixie looking down, or it was just, it was Vixie and Tod looking down to, at the home, where, Widow Tweed is and where Copper are, kind of as a one last way of Tod being able to say goodbye and such. And then we get the fade out, and then we get the two, we get the voiceover of the two younger, affirming their everlasting friendship. Let's see here. In regard, and that's basically where the first movie ends. I'll talk about the sequel in a minute, but first let's go over a little bit of other things that other things that go with the movie. So we have Mickey Rooney played the adult version of Tod. He was a musical star for a long time. Uh, More younger group. If you've seen Night at the Museum, he's the old, shorter, bald janitor character, because there's Dick Van Dyke, and then there's Mickey Rooney, and then there's one other one, but I cannot remember what the African American actor's name is off the top of my head. But Mickey Rooney's the shorter one. He was a musical, and he was in lots of I think it was lots of MGM musicals at the time, or when he was a lot younger. And then we have Kurt Russell as Copper, as the grown version of Copper, which I think is pretty good. We have Pearl Bailey as Big Mama, who was a singer at the time. Not really too much. Pat Buttram, who plays Chief, was kind of this, had been in a lot of Disney movies, or has been in a few Disney movies over the years, mostly playing like the, it's not exactly a good way of putting it, but a little bit of like the hick character, unfortunately. He was in The Rescuers, the first one. He played Luke, who was this like drunk mouse character, drunk swamp rat character. Not really too much else there in regards to the characters, for who was like a really, really good one. Something that I slightly glossed over was that when spring rolls around in the movie, we do see the caterpillar maker return. And first of all, caterpillars' lives I do not believe end up being anywhere near this long in actuality, but caterpillar shows up, and then the caterpillar ends up turning into into a butterfly, and that just like befuddles Dinky and Boomer. It's like, oh my god, what happened to it? In regards to some of the production history for the movie, it was started in 1977, I believe, was when the production started for it. And the movie itself, it's a very good analogy as to what was happening at the studio at the time, because it was the last film, I believe, that had any work done on it by, I think, Willie Reitherman, Wolfgang Reitherman, who was one of the 9 Old Men, who was the current head of the Disney animation department at that time. He worked alongside Walt and everything for a long time. As I said, he was one of the Disney's 9 Old Men. I still think at some point I might do at least a video where I talk about the 9 Old Men. I don't know if it'll be like a series or if it'll just be like one video, but like Disney's 9 Old Men would end up resulting in, like, all of these ones are what trained and groomed and inspired, the animators that are around today, or the animators that were in, like Disney's Renaissance age in the, late 80s and then into the 90s and into the early 2000s, and still are now. But this was a transition film. Fox and the Hound was a transition film because several of the 9 Old Men, Ollie Johnston, Frank Thomas, and Wolfgang Reitherman, as I said, had been working on it originally. They developed a lot of the characters. They had got some of the base work down for some of the scenes. And then it was, as I said, it was an allegory for what was happening in the movie, where it's like Chief is this old hunting dog, and then they bring in this new hunting dog. And this is when they were bringing in lots of new artists. Ron Clements, Glenn Keane, John Musker, Don Bluth, who were brought in. And, so it's like, they're the ones doing a lot of the animating on the movie, but they're being supervised by the 9 Old Men that are still there. Which, I think that would, that would be like nerve-wracking as all get out, but it's like, okay, I'm getting to hang out with like the guys who I grew up watching their animated movies. That would be me getting to like geek out over the guys that did, Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and Pixar movies. That would be like that same equivalent of like, oh my god, I get to geek out with these guys and ask them what happened type thing. And like, these are a direct connection to Walt, because a lot of the animators that are around now, unfortunately, were not around during the time when Walt was alive. Or at least they were not around, as in like they weren't working at Disney at the time. But the 9 Old Men were. So it's like you get this direct connection to Walt. And And so it was like a passing of the torch type of movie is what Fox and the Hound was, which I think they did a very good job with it, because a lot of those animators that were a part of those, like I think it was Ron Clemens. Is it Ron Clemens or Don Keene? One of the two, or Glenn Keane. One of the two is they're the ones that brought Little Mermaid to the studio. The idea of doing Little Mermaid. So it's, they have this whole of, they did this and now they're doing this and they brought us all these things and they're still around now, and or they're more supervising things, and then like they trained the next generation type thing. So I just love how that worked. You know, a lot of the other ones. Unfortunately, at one point, Don Bluth, who you may recognize from names like I don't know, The Land Before Time movies, and We're Back, and Thumbelina, and a whole bunch of other animated movies that were not done by Disney but were done by other companies. He had started out as a Disney animator, but unfortunately early on in the production of Fox and the Hound, him and 11 other Disney animators left. And they started their own studio that became Sullivan Bluff Studios, which did, later on did The Secret of Nim and stuff like that around the same time that Fox and the Hound came out. They did a few other movies here and there, but there was a lot of, it was not uncommon for like animators to start off at Disney, maybe be on a movie or two, and then end up leaving Disney to go do something else. Mostly because either they just didn't like what was going on at Disney, or they had their own stories that they wanted to tell, so they went and did their own movies. Which, I like We're Back, I like Thumbelina, I like Land Before Time movies. I'm perfectly fine with, Disney, with the fact that they came from Disney, because there's still that connection there, which I'm perfectly fine with. I think I was trying to remember. I don't think Don Bluth ended up resulting in like Anastasia, the animated movie Anastasia, but there's like other things that connect. And I'm going to mention this now because I'm mentioning it because I mentioned both already. And Jodie Benson, who, if you know Disney, is Ariel in The Little Mermaid. She also voiced Thumbelina in the Don Bluth Thumbelina. So I just think that's cute. It's like, okay, that's cute. Yeah, it's like she gets to do both of those, and she kind of got to work with both. But yeah, so they'd worked on a lot of other movies at times, but over the years. Let's see. In regards to other stuff, in regards to production of Fox and the Hound, wasn't really too much else. It's, later on these other ones would go on to work on other movies, Ron Clements and Don Keene, other things like that, ended up working on other movies later on down the line, that would then influence other movies and other movies and other movies. Now we get into the sequel territory. The sequel, Fox and the Hound 2, came out in 2006. I enjoy it. It's not a bad one. I didn't rewatch it for this one simply because it's like it's not one of my favorite ones, but it's okay. The premise of the movie is that it takes place when Tod and Copper are still, a kitten and a puppy. I think it's supposed to take place like in between when Copper starts getting tied up, so we can't, run off and play with Tod, and when that happens, it's supposed to be taking place at like I think it's like a state fair or something like that, and and what ends up happening is there's this group of singing dogs that are called the Singing Strays show up. And there is one who is called Dixie, who is voiced by Reba McEntire. There is Cash, who is voiced by Patrick Swayze. There's one that's called Granny Rose. There's one that's called Waylon, and then Floyd, who a lot of these are references to, of course, country singers. Dixie is, I'm pretty sure, a reference to either the Dixie Chicks or just, singing this, whistling Dixie and stuff like that. And Cash is, of course, a reference to Johnny Cash. Waylon, reference to Waylon Jennings. And Floyd is, I know, a reference to something else, but unfortunately I cannot remember off the top of my top of my head who that is a reference to. Granny Rose is just kind of a reference to, there was a lot of older women in country at, in the time frame. And so we do a lot of that. Jeff Foxworthy is in the film. He plays the band's leader, who is just kind of he's just a guy that plays fiddle or guitar or whatever for them to sing to. And they're just called the Singing Strays. And Tod and Copper end up seeing them at the fair. And Copper really, really likes them. And he pretends to be a stray so he can try to go with them. But that leads to issues because Tod wants him to stay with him so they can still have fun. But, we know in the end of the movie that Copper is going to stay, of course, because that leads back into, what else happens in the original movie. But, they did it that way. And, conflict happens between, like, Dixie and Cash. And, they're supposed to be in love, but they're very much, they don't want to, do that. And they were supposed to be, it's not, I don't remember a whole lot that goes on in the movie. It's been a while since I've watched it. It's not one of my over the top, ones that I want to watch, but at some point I'll probably end up rewatching all of the sequels. Probably not necessarily with my dad, but maybe on my own, since a lot of them are on Disney Plus. But they do that. But Tod and Copper end up, I think it's more Tod that ends up fixing things. Most of the rest of the cast, I think, is there. I don't remember if Big Mama pops up in the movie or Dinky and Boomer necessarily, but I think they might. I'm just not sure. We still have Widow Tweed there. She, her and Amos Slade are more of a comic relief thing, and so is Chief. They're more comic relief types in the movie. I mean, Widow Tweed isn't necessarily super over serious character in the original, but she is very protective of Tod in those regards. But most of the time, I don't think for Amos and Widow Tweed and Chief in the sequel, there's not too much that they do that's not just comedic effect. Which is kind of fun. Amos gets like a pie thrown in his face at some point, from what I remember reading on the Wikipedia. But all the Singing Strays end up back together at one point, and Copper, of course, stays with Tod because he likes to play with Tod, which of course then leads into him getting chained up and going to become a hunting dog, blah 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 blah. But the Singing Strays end up singing, and they get heard by like a talent director or a talent scout, and then they end up getting to sing on the Grand Ole Opry. Which is just funny because, Grand Ole Opry, Nashville ties back into stuff. So they get to sing on the Grand Ole Opry, and then we get to just see, like, Tod and, Copper having fun at the end of the movie. A much more lighthearted take. Admittedly, I would have been interested to see a sequel in regards to, like, what's happening, more what happened after the end of the original, but I can see why they didn't do it that way. Mostly because that would involve having to do a whole convoluted thing of, okay, well, no, they can't come back, and Amos is not going to have Chief chase him, but they're still going to be this, but they're still going to be that. So I can kind of see why they didn't necessarily do it that way. Kind of like what they did with Bambi, because with Bambi, there's like this whole chunk of Bambi's life that we don't get to see between when his, mother dies and then when he comes back when he's a full-grown buck. So that made sense for Bambi to place the sequel in that time frame. So, I kind of get what they did with that. Other Disney movies, 4 sequels kind of jump ahead a bit. Some of them, you get more of a prequel, like with The Little Mermaid. With The Little Mermaid, you get both a prequel and a sequel, which that's going to be fun to deal with when I get to that. But, as I mentioned, for the sequel, they got Patrick Swayze, they got Reba McEntire, they got Jeff Foxworthy, they have a whole bunch of other ones that pop in to play these different characters, which I just think is fun. Then we get into stuff outside of animation, I guess. Well, first we have House of Mouse. Tod and Copper have made brief appearances in House of Mouse, nothing too over the top. In this one, there is a reference called Dining Goofy, which I don't know exactly what happens in that episode, but unfortunately there ends up being a rumor of, like, there's fleas in the House of Mouse, and that resulted in a bunch of the canine animals. We got the Dalmatians, we got Tod and Copper here, all running out of the House of Mouse. It's not true, there are no fleas in the House of Mouse, but, a rumor somewhere along the line. So, all the cats run out, all the dogs and cats run out, which is kind of funny. there's no, there's no Kingdom Hearts stuff with Tod and Copper. If there was, admittedly, it would probably be like the same way as like if like Sora and Donald and Goofy or one of the other, like a Terra, Aqua, and Ventus ended up having to interact with them. Um, it would either be like maybe, oh, you have to find, like, you meet Widow Tweed somewhere, and then you meet Amos somewhere, and then you have to find, find Tod and find Copper and bring them back, or send them back, or whatever the case may be, or, Tod and Copper, or whatever the case may be. But they didn't, they didn't use them in Kingdom Hearts, which I'm like, okay, I can kind of see that. They did bring them a little bit into Once Upon a Time. So there's kind of a roundabout way of referencing the Fox and the Hound in Once Upon a Time. In Once Upon a Time, you have Granny, who is the owner of, in Storybrooke, she's the owner of Granny's Diner and Granny's Bed and Breakfast. She is also just Granny in, Once Upon a Time in the Enchanted Forest realm. She is the grandmother of Ruby, or Red, who is Little Red Riding Hood. This is Ruby. Ruby is her Storybrooke persona. Ruby as, Red, Little Red Riding Hood. I do love how they kind of, and this is basically where I can talk a little bit about what they do with Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood gets a little bit of a twist in this, because instead of it being that she gets attacked by a wolf, it's Little Red Riding Hood is the wolf. She's a werewolf. It's in their family blood. And Granny is supposed to be Widow Tweed, because she's referred to as Widow Lucas. And she's Widow Lucas, Granny. She has Red is her granddaughter by blood. Red's parents are unfortunately both dead, so Granny raises her and keeps her rather sheltered because of the curse on their family, or whatever the case is. But what ends up happening is, at one point, Granny, when Granny was younger, she had kind of been, she had known a man whose name was Amos Slade, and he had a crush on her. This is expanded on a bit in Once Upon a Time. It's a side novel called Red's Untold Tale, which goes a little bit more into Little Red Riding Hood and into Granny's past. She knew Amos Slade, and he had feelings had a crush on Granny when they were younger, but she didn't pick him. She picked someone else to get married to, and that kind of flame burned on. And then at one point, he does have a hunting dog. Slade ends up getting killed, and then the dog gets taken in by, I think, a boy named Peter, who is, of course, a reference to Peter in the Wolf, because I think him and Red were friends, or they kind of liked each other. I don't remember exactly what it is. Off the top of my head, I do not remember who Red ends up with in the series. Give me one moment. I'm going to check that, and then I will let you know, because this is about the only place that I'd be able to talk about that. So give me a moment. So what it says on the Wikipedia for Once Upon a Time about Ruby, and I kind of remembered a little bit of this. We're working our way through Once Upon a Time again at this point in time, but we haven't even finished season 1 at this point, but we'll get there eventually. This doesn't happen until like 4 or 5 seasons or whatever it was in, so it's quite a while in. But what ends up happening is, at one point, Ruby leaves Storybrooke, and then she ends up interacting with, because she goes to Oz, and she ends up interacting with Dorothy, and then Dorothy ends up getting cursed to sleep. I think it's Selena that curses her to sleep, and so the only way to wake her up is True Love's kiss. And Ruby is kind of encouraged by Snow at one point. It was like, okay, so you liked Dorothy, you give her True Love's kiss and she'll wake up. And Dorothy's like, Ruby's like, but what if it's not real? What if it's not true love? What if it doesn't work? And Snow's like, you have to try. Because Snow and Ruby are very good friends. They were very good friends in the Enchanted Forest, and they're very good friends in Storybrooke. And that doesn't, Ruby tries, and Dorothy wakes up, and Dorothy and Ruby end up being together, I think. yeah, I think they end up being together. Since there's no specific statement on whether or not they actually end up, getting married at one point, it's not really listed. But Dorothy and Ruby kind of end up being together in the end, so I think that that's kind of cute. But yeah, Widow Tweed is kind of a Granny in Once Upon a Time is Widow Tweed. She's also a reference to another fairy tale character that involves wolves that I was not as familiar with. I mean, I'm familiar with the story of like the Three Little Pigs, but I wasn't 100% familiar with some of this other bit. There's another fairy tale called, I think it's The Wolf and the it's like The Wolf and the what is it? Seven Goats or Seven Kids or something like that. And she's, there's like a wolf and like seven kids or goats or whatever, and you know, Granny is a reference to that, in that Granny is supposed to be like, was like one of the goats or something like that, or I don't remember exactly. Give me one moment and I will let you know. Okay, so the fairy tale that Granny is also a reference to is called The Wolf and the Seven Young Goats. What it is, or the premise of it, is that it's a Grimm Brothers fairy tale. Of course, it's a Grimm Brothers fairy tale. How can it not be a Grimm Brothers fairy tale? So there's this mother goat that leaves her seven children at home. She goes off into the woods to find food. Wolf comes along, big bad wolf, and the wolf kind of tricks the goats into letting him into the house, and he eats a bunch of them, and he gets so full. The wolf gets so full that he falls asleep, and when the mother shows back up, she gets the goats she tells her youngest goat that's still there, her youngest kid, that's not eaten, bring me a knife and some scissors and thread and rocks. And she cuts open the wolf's stomach, out pop all the other goats, so they're all fine. She then stuffs a bunch of rocks in the wolf's stomach, sews it all back up, because in a fairy tale you can do this, sews the goat all back up, or sews the wolf all back up, and then when the wolf wakes up, he wanders off because he's thirsty, goes to the river, and ends up drowning. So, I think it's supposed to be like a slight reference to, it's a reference to not let strangers into your house. Or if you do, I guess, if they eat you or your siblings, slice open their stomach and you can get out. One of the two. But there's a little bit of, there's, probably some other morals to the story there. Don't let strangers into your house, or, always listen to your mother type thing. But yeah, Granny, I guess, is supposed to be a roundabout reference to that. So, not as familiar with that in some cases, but it's okay. Not a super familiar fairy tale that I'm aware of. She is just, a reference to different things in other fairy tales. That's one thing that I always liked about Once Upon a Time, is because we just watched the Hansel and Gretel episode, and there's a few other bits that pop up that are like very vague references to other fairy tales, but the way that they weave them in is like a reference to other Disney movies, or references to, other fairy tales that you may not be as familiar with, or darker sides of fairy tales. And I think that that's kind of a fun thing. Widow Tweed, or Granny, is also a reference to like the widowed mother from the fairy tales of like Snow White and Rose Red, because Snow White and Ruby Rose Red are related. They're best friends in the series, so that's kind of another allusion to that, because Granny takes good care of Snow as well, and later on she ends up kind of being a bit of a mothering figure to Emma. She's also one that a lot of people in the town tend to go to for advice. So that's pretty much where this ends. That's about all that I have for you. If I remember correctly, the next one is either The Great Mouse Detective or The Black Cauldron, I think. That, from what I remember from my stack of Disney movies, I think that's right. If not, then you'll find out when I post this one what the other one was, and I was wrong, but whatever. Yeah. So I thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a nice rest of your day. I hope you liked the video. Bye. Copper, you're my very best friend. And you're mine too, Tod. We'll always be friends forever, won't we? Yeah, forever.